Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football, and welcome back to another edition of Football Theory. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Pleased to be joined by my good friend and esteemed colleague, Jeff Howe. Today, we're going to get into the newest addition to the Texas coaching staff, the newest special assistant, Mark Stoops, former Kentucky head coach. And we'll get into kind of the recent history of those hires, specifically the head coaches who have been hired as special assistants. I think Sark has a special place, all right, in his kind of a coaching, really in his coaching preferences from year to year based on some of the knowledge that is brought in and the really kind of the foundational football philosophy of some of these special assistants that he brought in. So we'll get into that. I want to talk first about, Mark Stoops, because I think there are a couple of things that I think on the surface are just really beneficial for Texas here before we start digging deep into it and going down the rabbit hole, Jeff. Number one, the experience in the SEC. I mean, at the time, he's the longest tenured head coach in the SEC at the time of his dismissal. That is something that is invaluable for Sark, considering, he's new to the SEC, still learning the ecosystem, still learning the terrain. I always say you want to, when you hire probably special assistants, you either want a dinosaur or you want an alien, right? Dinosaur is ancient, knows the terrain, been around forever, just got a lot of knowledge, wisdom to bring to the table. An alien may not have all that, but at least they have the 30,000-foot view and a different perspective than everybody because they're new to this whole thing. All right, so they just may see the world differently than everybody else. This is the dinosaur, though. This is a guy that has been around. He knows the deep trenches of the SEC, and I think that resource alone is going to help Sark, especially on some of these road trips he's got to take this year.
There's a couple things there, Rod. I think number one, what you just laid out about the road trips, it might, and this isn't the reason why you hire a Mark Stoops, but he can tell you, hey, when you go to Knoxville, you may want to have your police escorts take this route to the stadium. So that way, you're avoiding traffic, so you get there cleaner. It's less stress on you. Hey, when you go to Baton Rouge, you may think you want to stay in this hotel. No, you want to stay over here. Right here. Unless you say crazy, they'll figure out where you are. Like, you want to stay here. Yeah. And I think, look, a guy that nobody knows better than Mark Stoops. Very few coaches would know about Kirby Smart's tendencies better than Mark Stoops. Nobody's probably studied Lane Kiffin's tendencies more than Mark Stoops, or Josh Heupel's tendencies more than Mark Stoops that Sark could have added to the staff. I know Will Muschamp's got some of that experience too, but and it doesn't hurt to have somebody like that in your building. It's similar, Rod, to when Sark hired Gary Patterson. Yes, you wanted to bring him in to help PK get well-versed in running match quarters and kind of perfecting your coverage on the back end, which we'll get to that in a minute because there's another layer to this Mark Stoops hire. But you also, hey, what do I need to know when I go head-to-head against a Mike Gundy? Or what do I need to know when I go head-to-head against a Matt Campbell or, fill in the blank head coach in the Big 12 that maybe Sark wasn't that familiar with, having only been in the league for a year? Like, learn that, as you call it, that Big 12 ecosystem that Gary Patterson, he was the Big 12 ecosystem for a really long time. So I think this is really similar, and it's probably not the reason you do it, but it doesn't hurt to have that kind of experience that Mark Stoops has.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, right? And it's hard to kind of pin down exactly what the reason is for Sark. I'm sure he has different reasons, and it's probably multifactorial. But I think that we can, as football theories, kind of try to psychoanalyze Sark here and look at some of the strengths that, Mark Stoops is going to bring to the table. One of them is, like you said, the extensive knowledge of the SEC. That also helps you with officials and officiating.
Yeah.
Right, because a lot of times it's the same officials you see over and over again, can learn their tendencies. By the way, that's an NFL thing, that you actually try to pick up the tendencies, the patterns of officiating of different crews. Trust me, and they got numbers on it in the data age that we live in. And what I'm just talking about from his knowledge, he probably would know. I mean, first of all, you want to be a disciplined football team anyway, but there is a certain way that some officials call games, and you do have to, if you adapt your style or adapt your technique to that. I'll just throw this out there. And I know Kentucky, they weren't good teams, but go look at their penalties. They only had 60 in 2025, first in the SEC. in penalties. They were 5th in 2024. They were 3rd in 2022 in the SEC and 2nd in the SEC in penalties in 2021. They weren't necessarily great, but he knew how not to get penalized by certain crews. Like his teams were not heavily penalized teams. They were actually some of the least penalized teams in the SEC. You go look at since the Sark tenure, he was 8th in 2023, but 2021 2nd, 3rd in 2022, 5th in 2024, 1st. Is last year he had the least penalized team in the SEC. Mm-hmm. Your big issue, for 2 years, you've been in the SEC. You've been the most penalized team and the second most penalized team in the SEC.
And I think, and this isn't, and I think I just want to spell it out for everybody. What Rod is saying is it's not like, oh, you got to learn which officiating crews are crooked or going to street. No, that's not it at all. And I think special teams, it can show up in special teams, Rod, with your penalties, but I think
it can show up a lot of ways.
Yeah, the 2 areas I think where it really, and this is something I don't think Texas has done really well, obviously with the number of penalties, is kind of adjusting your play to how the game is being called. And I think the 2 areas where that shows up the most, I think it's holding on the offensive line, and I think it's defensive holding or defensive pass interference, because there are some crews that are going to legislate it by the book, which means, hey, if you're grabbing outside of a guy's chest plate on a run play, you're going to get called for holding. You got to keep your hands inside this week. You got to make sure you're buttoned up. Or, hey, this officiating crew, they might call DPI, but you know what? They'll let you grab a little bit. Just don't do it blatantly. Just have good technique. Make it look like you know what you're doing. Try not to be obvious, but they'll let you get away with it a little bit. Those are little nuances, Rob, that I just don't think Texas has done a really good job of in the last couple of years of adjusting as they've gone on the fly. One of my big complaints, and yes, it's nitpicking, but man, as much as they throw the ball to Ryan Wingo, he should generate a heck of a lot more defensive pass interference calls than he does. And that's the stuff you got to learn. Hey, if this crew's going to throw it, then you got to really sell it after the play. You got to act like you just got mugged walking to the ATM or something. Like this guy just beat you with a crowbar in the parking lot or something. Oh my gosh, just looking around where's the flag? And this goes back to, I learned this a long time ago, Rod. Baseball guys used to tell me this, hey, if it's a play, the catcher's throwing it down to second base on a stolen base opportunity, sometimes, man, if you're the second baseman or the shortstop catching it, if you just get up and flash the ball at the umpire and act like you're making a really good case, whether he's out or safe, sometimes that'll just compel the umpire. His adrenaline will take over and he'll call the guy out just because you made a really convincing case. Sometimes that's what you got to do, to draw a defensive pass interference call if you're a wide receiver. But that's the kind of stuff that Mark Stoops can help start. No, hey, you got this crew this week. Your guys on the offensive line better be real buttoned up because they will call holding.
He knows something. I'm serious. The numbers would indicate, dude, something. Your teams ain't necessarily good teams, but they are disciplined teams. They do not get called for a lot of penalties. Like I said, he had the least amount of penalties called this year in the SEC. You had the most. Okay, that alone should at least pique your interest as a coach. Mm-hmm. And since Sark has been at Texas, he's been really, really good, as I pointed out. Okay, so that's one thing to throw out there. But I want to go back to kind of the beginning here for Sark and look at the former head coaches who become special assistants and just talk about their impact and their immediate impact. And it's been, to me, it's been eye-popping. It's been mind-blowing to me to look at their immediate impact and see how Sark has been influenced by them coming in. So let's take Gary Patterson. You talked about him. They brought Gary Patterson in 2022. It was clear that PK really didn't know the ecosystem of the Big 12. You talk about all the time the hybrid spread schemes. They really were a challenge for PK to figure out. They bring in Gary Patterson, and Gary Patterson essentially he gives him the cliff notes. You can tell. Here's the best evidence of it. In the last year for Gary Patterson at TCU, they were running close to 54% quarters coverage. All right, his last year there at TCU. In Texas' first year with PK, they were only 33% quarters coverage, and it was mostly vision quarters. It wasn't even match quarters, which is what Gary Patterson was famously playing. In that 2022 season, after hiring Gary Patterson, your quarters coverage goes to the most in the Big 12 at 54%. He was at 53.5% in 2021, his last year at TCU, and then you famously jumped to 54%. That is not a coincidence, ladies and gentlemen. That is a straight up Gary Patterson influence. And then so fast forward ahead, because Gary Patterson was great and Gary Patterson moved on. Then you bring in Paul Chryst. And I famously love the Paul Chryst hire. You brought in Paul Chryst, who was known for a few things, but at his time as Wisconsin, he would use a lot of extra O-line packages, a lot of hippo packages, big jumbo packages, and he would throw out of them at times as well. He was known for this. It's kind of one of his unique traits as an offensive play caller. Sark had just started dabbling into the 6-0 line package in 2022, but it really wasn't that successful. You were at 5 yards per rush, almost 7 yards per attempt throwing. It just wasn't, I don't know if it was worth the resources you were putting into it at the time. He brings in Paul Chryst. Your rushing numbers stay about the same, but your yards per attempt jumped to 11 yards per attempt. And you jumped almost 7 yards per play total out of the 6-0 line package. Your explosive play rate increases out of it, and you actually use it to present power personnel, and then you would insulate it with max protections and just chunk it deep out of your 6-0 line package. And it worked really well for you in 2023 that way. And remember that also in 2023 was when you get Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy involved in some of your really creative, exotic jumbo packages, and they get receiving touchdowns. I think that was a direct byproduct of bringing in Paul Chryst and him influencing Sark's bigger, heavier personnels. Mm-hmm. And then you go to the third, you go to Neil Brown. And Neil Brown, and I'll give you credit because you're the one that kept pointing this out. You're like, oh man, watch Neil Brown's influence on the quarterback run game. Watch it. Well, I thought it was pretty evident that they expanded the quarterback run game and used a lot of power gap schemes with it. Garrett Green, who was the starting quarterback for West Virginia in 2024, remember 75% of his runs were gap power schemes. Arch this year, 76% of his runs gap power scheme. I think it was like 77 actually. Yeah. Gap power schemes. He was running the same kind of gap power schemes. And this is the first year this past season where you actually ran more gap power schemes runs than zone runs. First time. And it was Arch that flipped the script for you. Same thing with Neil Brown. Every year Neil Brown was at West Virginia, they ran more zone runs than gap scheme runs, except his last year where they flipped the script. And they ran more gap power scheme runs than zone runs, just like Texas did his first year as a special assistant. That is not a coincidence, in my opinion. So what will be the Mark Stoops impact as a former head coach to become special assistant? Because the others have had a direct influence on Sark's play calling or on the play calling of the defensive coordinator on the other side.
Yeah. I love how you laid that out, Rod. And you look at basically in a nutshell, Sark hired those guys because he needed something specific from them. And you got to think when he brought Paul Chryst in, what else changed going from 22 to 23? You didn't have Bijan or Rojo anymore. So you're like, okay, I can't just lean on the fact that I've got 2 NFL running backs in the backfield to run the football. Like I got to change some things up and be more physical. And we talked about it at the time, like there was a lot of, because if you look at the coaching tree, Sark and Paul Chryst both come from the Norv Turner tree, which means they come from the Ernie Zampese tree, which means they come from the Don Coryell tree. And I think if you look at those guys, the way they call offense, there's a lot of similarities in just kind of what they believe foundationally. But I think there's a couple things. And the 2 things I think Mark Stoops is going to bring, Rod, are the 2 things that Sark really needs. And I'll get into a third that I think is just going to kind of be a benefit of this. One is when you look at Mark Stoops' teams at Kentucky, they didn't have a talent advantage over everybody else they played in the SEC, and they usually didn't have a quarterback advantage. So what did they have to do? You had to play really physical football. And Mark Stoops' best teams at Kentucky could really run the football, whether it was Lynn Bowden or Benny Snell, like whoever the running back was, even this last year, like with Seth McGowan, like they could really run the football. They prided themselves on, if they were going to do nothing else, we're at least going to try to run the football and shorten the game. There's a lot of similarities between kind of what Mark Stoops and Kentucky were in the SEC. If Texas fans want to look at it like this, like what Matt Campbell and Iowa State were in the Big 12. You don't have a talent advantage, but you've just got to be really physical. And the other thing you've got to be, to your point earlier, you got to be really disciplined. And Sark has done a really good job. One area, Rod, where they really improved that I don't know if we give them enough credit, I do, and people are probably sick of hearing me talk about it. The fumble problems in 24 were rectified tenfold in 2025. Yeah. You only had 2 lost fumbles.
That's right.
And you were one of the best teams in the country protecting the football. Problem fixed. The penalties have got to get fixed, and you want to get back to having a physical edge on offense. I think Mark Stoops can help you do that. The third area, Rod, and I'll lead you into this. If you look at Mark Stoops' background, like why was one of the main reasons we talked about why Sark made the defensive coordinator transfer from PK to Will Muschamp? He wanted one voice on defense because he wants the front end and the back end tied together. He's tired of the front not knowing what the coverage is doing and vice versa. And I think Will Muschamp's going to help that. Blake Gideon's going to be really part of that. But what is Mark Stoops' background? Remember that 2001 Miami secondary where, Sean Taylor and Antrell Roll, those guys were the backups because guys like Ed Reed and Mike Rump and Philip Buchanan were starting? Who's the secondary coach, Rod, on Larry Coker's staff in 2001 from 01 to 03? Mark Stoops was a secondary coach. Mark Stoops was also Jimbo Fisher's first defensive coordinator at Florida State when they were putting out really good defenses. So, hey, it's not a bad resource to have if you need to clean up something from a coverage standpoint, to go down the hall and ask Coach Stoops to pop into this defensive meeting real quick and let's sort out some coverage stuff. So I'm just saying, I think it's for the physicality and the discipline, but the added bonus is you've got a guy that's really, because he's been a head coach for so long, you forget guy was one of the best defensive backs coaches in the country when he was an assistant coach.
To me, that's my number one reason, or at least the number one reason for Sark to bring him in. There are a lot of reasons. You just gave it a lot of great reasons. We talked about some of the added value of bringing in, one of the more tenured head coaches in the history of the SEC. But man, the fact that secondary is all he knows and all he does, really. Not. And he's a head coach, but I'm talking about that's his original expertise is secondary and coverages. He played DB. That's his expertise and coached it. And that's how he really got his claim to fame, if you will, was coaching really good defensive backs. And Texas this past season, I would say it all the time, I think your secondary needs better communication. That's hard to say considering you did have Michael Taft back there. But there were several times obviously there were busted coverages last season. And there were times where guys looked like they were ill-informed about where the help was going to be, or they didn't know where the help was going to be. Well, that's an issue. So if I'm sorry, I tell Mark Stoops, listen, I need you to make sure that my secondaries, their knowledge, number one, of the coverages. They need to know what the weakness of the coverage is, of every coverage. They need to know the strength of the coverage. They need to know where their help is, because your help will tell you where your leverage is. So you need to know your help is. And then they need to know exactly how defenses are going to try to attack that coverage based on formation. So I would like him to expand the knowledge base really of the secondary, because they need to know the front. And I don't think a lot of times they know where their help is in the coverage. And then you need to know the front. You do need to know the pressure. You need to know if it's a pressure or a blitz. Why? Because a blitz is going to take another guy from coverage and add him to the pressure. There's going to be fewer guys in coverage. Does everybody know how many guys are in coverage based on every coverage and every call? All right. Like, I think there are some ways that the secondary can be more situationally aware. And I think part of that is being more immersed in the subtle nuances of the coverage. Not just, hey, I got my responsibility is I got the deep third. It's like, no. It's not just a deep third. You need to understand the entire complexity of the coverage, because that's going to help you be able to, if you're in quarters coverage and you want to snake the dig, you got to know exactly, to add yourself as an added defender, you got to know where the weakness is in the coverage or the strength. And maybe you can then, kind of lose yourself in the coverage, as they say. Like Jadae Barron would do this. Got 5 interceptions in 2024. 3 of those came as a secondary and a tertiary defender. It wasn't even the main defender. Why? Because he knew the entire grasp and in the entire complexity of the coverage. Yeah. So he knew that, I don't even need to be here. I can add myself to other areas of the coverage. I can go fox the post if I want to, which he did, that beautiful interception early on in the season. So that's what I think I need to see more of, that these guys understand leverage. They know what the help is in the coverage. They know what the weakness and the strength is of the coverage. They know if it's a pressure or a blitz or a sim pressure. And I'm not saying that they don't, but oftentimes when I see you misaligned or I see you playing the wrong leverage, then what am I supposed to think? When you're inside leverage, but you got inside help. And I'm thinking, well, why would you fall for the inside fake when you got inside help? So just things like that. So I would put him in charge of it if I was.
Yeah, At this point, you're doubling down. Like, look, our secondary play was so bad. Not only am I bringing Will Muschamp in to help fix it, I'm bringing Mark Stoops in to help fix it too. And I think the good thing, Rod, really, other than Jelani McDonald and Derek Williams, you don't have a ton of game experience at Texas in that secondary. I mean, Phil Smees didn't play much as a freshman. Played a little bit last year. Zealous Hicks, didn't play very many defensive snaps last year. Cade Phillips has the 1 year. Kobe Black last year started to get some experience. Bo Masco is brand new to this system. So I think it's a really good time to maybe just start from scratch in terms of your coverages and what you want to prioritize, what you want to do. So to your point about building communication, you weren't that good at it last year. So just start from scratch. Just build something new and build something from the ground up. And between Mark Orfe, who's worked for Will Muschamp, Blake Gideon, who's worked for Will Muschamp himself, and Stoops. Ron, if you can't get this secondary fixed, then I don't know what you're going to do at this point.
Yeah. No, I think they're in a good place because they brought back Blake Gideon. He was part of that successful secondary in 2024. And you had Scott Hazelton, who is now, I think, the DC at Wake Forest. Wake Forest, go look at their pass efficiency defense. I think it's like top 20, like 21st or something like that in the country. It helped having basically a guy with extensive knowledge, because he was just a defensive coordinator for so long, but extensive knowledge of coverages, essentially teaching your nickels and teaching your safeties. And it paid huge dividends because everybody in that back end seemed like they were dialed in and hive-minded at the time. Maybe Mark Stoops can play that role or be that guy for you.
The other thing I'll say too, Georgia's not on the schedule, so the only way you'd meet Georgia would either be in Atlanta for the SEC championship or in the CFP. Even though the talent disparity was the size of the Grand Canyon, like Mark Stoops' Kentucky teams competed pretty well against Georgia, like at least held their own from a physicality standpoint. But the other thing too, Mark Stoops won 5 of his last 8 games against Florida. So between bringing in Mark Stoops, Jabbar Jalouk was on that Florida staff, Billy Gonzalez was the interim head coach. October 17th, Rod, when the Gators come to Austin, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I'm taking it over. I don't care what the spread is. I'm taking the Longhorns. You could tell Sark is doubling down. He wants that game back that they lost in Gainesville last year. He won't probably come out and ever say it, but I don't need to read the tea leaves when he's stuffing them down my throat.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, it ain't easy to find coaches that got wins over Kirby Smart anyway. Sark's he's doing his damnedest, but I think the coaching staff now, you got 1 total win over Kirby Smart. So, hey, it ain't easy. That ain't easy. All right. Thanks, Jeff. Good stuff as always. Appreciate you. Thanks to Matthew behind the scenes, doing a great job. And we appreciate each and every one of you out there for watching and for listening. For Jeff and for Matthew, I'm Lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Until next time, hook 'em horns.